for Pima County. This resolution was recently passed last year in the middle of a pandemic crisis. Thank you for bringing awareness and acknowledging the role of race in our society. Thank you, each and every one of you, and to our panelists beforehand for being here and engaging in this conversation with us. I will now turn it over to Leanne Hernandez, our Director of the Women's Leadership, Empowerment, and Wellness Center for the YWCA.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Magda. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to our audience who has joined us in these panelists who are here today to share their wisdom and their thoughts with us. My name is Leanne Hernandez, and I use she, her, and her as my pronouns. I identify as Chicana. I was raised by Rose and Stephen Hurwitz, and I am the daughter of Erlinda Reyes, the granddaughter of Olaya, Jack, and Miriam, the great-granddaughter of Micaela, and the great-great-granddaughter of Urbana, or Mama Ywca, as my Theo called her. I come here humbly to welcome you all to start this conversation and to invite us all to be in this space together with grace, compassion, and care. I'm going to describe myself right now for those in our community that have sight loss or challenges with their sight. I'm an aging brown woman with graying temples and a rather neutral look on my face, although now I'm smiling. I am surrounded by a black screen with the words addressing racism as a public health crisis above my head and the YWCA logo and on the bottom right hand corner. I just want to say thank you for being here today as we kick off our annual Stand Against Racism. I also feel it's really important for me to name that this week and this year has been a lot for all of us. We sit near the end of one part of a pandemic called COVID, and yet we are in the midst of other pandemics and reckonings with the history that we all share, whether we see it or agree upon it. I come to you all with also a heavy heart and in deep introspection right now, as we have collectively bore witness to a great amount of violence and deep pain over this last week in particular. And though there was a collective sigh, and some accountability has been taken for the murder of George Floyd, I must reiterate that the accountability is not justice. It is a step, but we know that our work continues. And we must also see that we lost 11 precious Black lives during the trial of Derek Chauvin. So I want to hold space for us to begin to be able to do our own personal work, as well as the collective work required of us to move from declarations to change. Real, transformative, nonlinear, and ultimately, hopefully, healing. This is the work that we are part of and that we must all engage in. So I'm so happy to see you all here today, and I'm so thankful because this conversation is timely and really well overdue. We have so much work to do, and it takes all of us. So thank you for taking your part. I think it's important as we're having this conversation to also enter into it from a grounded place. So I'm just going to invite you, if you wish, all of us, to soften our gaze and to take 3 cleansing breaths. Thank you for bringing your open hearts and powerful minds to this conversation. I'd like to begin today by introducing my colleague and friend in this work, Deanna Lewis. And Deanna, I hope that you can help us to really further ground in our work with a brief discussion of the equity lens, informed by your expertise in public health. And Deanna comes to us from the U of A School of Public Health. Deanna?
Thank you so much, Leanne, for the lovely welcoming. Magdalena, thank you so much for honoring the land that we're on today. I greatly appreciate that. And Leanne, I'm just so grateful that you took the time to describe yourself, and it's something that I haven't done. So if you would give me a little bit of space, I would like to describe myself also to those that have visual impairment. My name is Deanna Lynn Lewis. I am an Afro-Euro-American. My father is African-American, and my ancestors come from the west coast of Ghana, and I'm part of the Akan tribe. My father's name is James Walter Lewis, and my paternal grandmother is Louise. On my mother's side is the European, and my great-grandparents came over to the United States in 1907 from Poland. And so I have an Eastern European descendancy. My mother is Dolores Ann Novoselsky, and my maternal grandmother is Anna. I'm 5'6". I am cloaked with a fair amount of melanin, which makes my skin brown. From the European side, I have brilliant blue eyes. My hair is long, it's curly, but a wave, and the curls aren't too tight. I would be considered sort of like sort of an athletic type of physique. And I experience a lot of joy in the work that I do at the College of Public Health and serving my community, because I've had the opportunity to serve the Tucson community essentially since I was about the age of 21. So it's an honor and a privilege to be with you today. The stand against racism, and when Leanne asked me to frame this, I gave it some thought. And so we'll go to the next slide. And typically we see, well, what's the difference between equity and equality? And maybe you've seen this infographic before, something similar, where equality is we have the resources and everyone gets the same. Equity is, well, we want to distribute the resources so that low resource areas get more resources, and the areas that have lots of resources don't need as much, and everyone still gets a little bit. And I like this slide, and because of the nature of the topic that we're talking about today, there is so much more. Next slide. So here's the reality, and I'll illustrate with examples that hopefully you'll be familiar with, right? So reality is, some people, some organizations, communities have lots of resources, some have some, and then some don't have any. And it's depicted in, like, I want to see the game. I want to know what's going on the other side of the fence. And I think what this reminds me of is the reality is schools, education, right? The high-performing schools get more resources and the low-performing schools get low resources, and they're called underperforming. Gosh, that's terrible. They're low-resourced, right? Now, equality reminds me of like the stimulus check, right? Yeah, whatever, but they distributed, I think, in a relatively equal way, right? I got $1,400. My mom got $1,400, and she's retired on Social Security, right? And I'm working full-time. The equity is like, well, gosh, over here, there's plenty of resources. Let's go ahead and shift them so that we can actually increase the capacity, right, of these areas that are under-resourced. But really, here's the piece, right? Because every time I've seen this infographic, that wall is stood there. It's like, let's deal with the people, let's deal with the resources, let's deal with the people, let's deal with the resources. If you click Leanne, we'll see really what we're shooting for here. What we're shooting for is justice, right? Let's get rid of the wall. That's the structure. That's the systems, right? Once we can do that, then we've addressed so much of the problem. And it's like, that sounds so easy. And I can assure you it is incredibly complex. So when we look at equity, we can't just remove equity and just talk about, well, the equitable distribution of resources so that we can reduce the health disparities experienced in minoritized communities, right? Next. So I would like to frame equity in the context of inclusion, diversity, access, and if you'll, equity. And maybe you've heard it's referred to as IDEA, IDEA. And if you click, you should see that. Inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And I really like this. And so inclusion is like, well, we just want to include everyone, right? And it's like, I've been invited here. We want to invite you as participants to join us in this conversation today. And we want to have diversity. And what does diversity mean? And I want to do this because I need some engagement, right? So how to explain diversity, and not so much how to explain it, but why is it so incredibly important? And so this is not a trick question, and I share this with my students every semester. Not a trick question. The answer is 12. What's the question? What's the problem? in your mind, feel free to answer that question, or if you want to put something in the chat, right? And I'll show you just some of the things, like 6 plus 6. Yep, that's 12. Oh, wait a minute, I got another one. The square root of 144. Whew, the answer is 12, right? What about this one? Oh, how many months in a year? Oh, you know what? The answer is still 12. Now, here's the thing, is if there's 100 of you in the audience and 50 of you, no, let's make it 99 of you think 6 plus 6 is 12, and only one person thinks the square root of 144 is 12. Does that make 6 plus 6 more right than the square root of 144? Absolutely not. And so that's why diversity is so important, because we get different lenses. The more diverse life experiences, who you are, how you identify, who you love, what you're involved in, the communities, is so important to this monumental task we have. So I think idea is a good start, right? Because there's other pieces, right? How do we include, right? Just because you send an invitation, for example, vaccines, just because we have a point of distribution at the university, well, that's okay if you can take the bus, you can ride your bike, you can walk, you can take time off work and get in the car. But what if you got to work and you can't get down there, right? So the access becomes really, really tricky. So I want to add a couple pieces. Next slide. So I think there's some things missing, right? And so go ahead. The first one is I've come up with idea cubed, right? So we've got inclusion, diversity, equity, access, right? There's a couple of other pieces that I think are really important. Next, accountability, right? People will say, we are inclusive, we are diverse. I see statements all over the place, and I can assure you, it doesn't matter what sector, we're all running into these same issues. The accountability piece, we can have it as a value, right? But if there's not accountability embedded in there, then it's just words. And so I came across this, but accountability is the glue that bonds commitment to the results, right? So if we don't have accountability, we're not going to be as effective and as efficient as we could be. So that's the A squared. Let's go to the A cubed, right? Because this piece is the piece that you can start doing today, right at this moment, right? Allyship. So that's the cubed, right? And I got this from Ywca, right? It is the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group. You can change, I'll substitute the dominant group, right? And the dominant group can look different depending on where you are, right? To advance the interest of an oppressed or marginalized outgroup. So allyship is really a beautiful starting point, because this work is so incredibly complex. And it's like, what does it look like? It looks like naming harm while it's happening, right? Naming the harm while it's happening, right? And what I have found out is that quite often there's discrepancies on the level of experience and education that we have all received on how to even begin to talk about something such as a social construct as race. And so by using this framework, I really think it poises us to really look critically at structural racism, the oppression that we have seen and that continues, and what can we do on an individual basis? What can we take back to our families, our friends, our colleagues, our workplaces, our communities, so that we can really eradicate, right? Eradicate these forms and systems of oppression. So I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be invited to the conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Deanna. That is so instructive and helpful. I really am so appreciative. And wow, it gives me so much pause and so much to think about. Thank you for that. Betty, I wanted to jump into the conversation with you and all of us, but Betty, I wanted to ask you in particular just to speak about your experience as the team lead, the supervisor in place that had the wherewithal to put forth the resolution, which is number 2020-92. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, you're muted, dear.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for inviting me, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you amazing people here. Um, so, as you know, when I was appointed to the Board of Supervisors, I had some really big shoes to fill, and I really went in with this attitude that, I knew Richard Elias for many, many years. I knew what he stood for, and I knew his values, and I knew how important community was to him and how devastated he was by this pandemic. As his wife said, it may not have killed him. COVID may not have killed him, but stressing out about COVID definitely had something to do with his passing. And so it was important to me to continue as much as I could his legacy of community, and we had a lot in common. We both had those values of caring for our vulnerable populations, and representing them gave me the opportunity to really look at what was going on. When I went in, and I mean, it's going into the storm, right? I mean, that was the storm right there, because we really, every day it was a changing, um, it was just changing. And so, and I, being who I am, I was questioning a lot of things and wanted to make sure that the people that I represented were getting the message correctly and were getting the accessibility that they needed to the testing, so that we knew where the problem, where to really focus. And as it was around the country, the focus really started with the congregate homes, and we all saw it, we understood it, and it was where all of the energies were focused. And we kept seeing, when we would see the maps, we kept seeing that the hotspots were not just in congregate homes, but you really couldn't pinpoint, and because it was all being done by zip code. So with my background in affordable housing and working with census tracts, I asked our GIS mapping person to provide us the same zip code map, but overlay it with census tract. And so when he did that, and we started getting those maps regularly, we were able to pinpoint that not all of the hotspots were happening in congregate homes. They were happening in neighborhoods. They were happening in neighborhoods where people worked. And we all know that came to fruition, where everyone really knew that our essential workers were the ones that were carrying. Many of them worked in congregate homes, and then they would bring it back home. They lived in multi-generational homes. They didn't have the luxury of staying home and working at home. They were out there, and yet they weren't getting the message. So luckily I went to Jan and I said, we really need to do better messaging. We need to make sure that we find someone that can relate to our Hispanic and refugee communities, and really start, using the messages that they can relate to. And so we did that as much as possible. I convened a community group that was able to tell me, what was going on out there, in the trenches, if you will. Why were people really getting the messaging, and what can we do better? And they provided me with some recommendations, which then I took back to our communications department, and some of them worked, some of them didn't, but we were at least on that track where we were listening and we were trying to make things happen. But during the same time, I saw that there were inequities. The testing wasn't being brought to these areas. And so I kept fighting and fighting, and I think, I think I got on some people's nerves, but that's okay, because
Good trouble, though, Betty.
we
It's good
needed to
trouble.
do what we needed to do, right? And so during this time, when we got the census tract data, my staff went to work. I had my staff working on a report, which is the pandemic shines a light on so many inequities and disparities. And so we were able to take that document to the county administrator and to the health department. That was one of my first meetings with Dr. Cullen, was giving her that report. And so in that report was the recommendation for declaring racism a public health issue. I really have to give a lot of credit to the staff that I inherited and loved there at Pima County. They worked hard every day. We were not just at home. We were really working and researching and writing and taking care of constituents, as much as we could. So that's really where it came from. I had this sense of urgency when I got there, and it just didn't stop. And really, it was a way for me to also deal with the grief that I was experiencing at the same time of losing a dear friend. And so I'm a solution focused person. I see something, and I always want to find solutions for those problems. I just don't like to see them happening and not do anything. But I also want to add one thing that because I am an affordable housing advocate, I don't know how many of you realize that April is Fair Housing Month. And when you go to fair housing and you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1968, 1964, then 1968, you realize that many of these structural racisms started in housing. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that the Fair Housing Act has made some strides in trying to protect our vulnerable people. But until government actually fixes the structural racism that they created in the very early days of segregation and redlining, which is what created a lot of the problems that we're having now, it's not going to change. And that's why it's so important for government to be part of the solution. We have to be. You have to be. I'm quasi-governmental in my new position, but I see that there's a lot to be done, and without the government political will, things won't happen as quickly as they need to happen.
Thank you for that context, Betty. And I just wanted to share a poll with you all on this call. The panelists, I'm sorry, I forgot to click it for you all, but the question is, were you aware that the Pima County's Board of Supervisors had declared racial and ethnic health disparities and income inequality in Pima County a public health crisis on December 1st, 2020? And I'm just waiting for the results we still have folks coming in. So I'll just give this another 30 seconds, y'all. And this is almost there, y'all, almost there.
And then I'd just like to make a note that there's a comment in the chat about
Yes.
April is also Financial Literacy Month.
Oh, great. Thank you for that, Deanna. I appreciate that. I'm going to just go ahead and end the poll now, and hopefully the results will be shared. And it looks like we are at 32% were aware of our audience. And that was with not 100% of the folks participating. But so, I think that this is another issue that Betty and I had talked about, and, Paul, all of us had talked about, was that there was just not the community awareness really that this had all taken place. Towards that end, Paul, I wanted to invite you right now as our representative of a community action group, to just speak to your role as a community person involved with the health department and with these issues, if you don't mind.
No, thank you. And thank you, Leanne and Magda, for hosting this and for all the panelists. I, as the CPC chair and also as the chair of the MEC, Supervisor Villegas had approached us to see if we could get some community support around it. And one of the really important things is not only did she come to us, but she also came to us and just kind of asked us for our thoughts and asked the community, what is there anything that needs to be changed, and looked into the recommendations that had been made. And I really think that when we talk about fixing, government fixing the infrastructure, that's one of the things that we really need to open up is we need to ensure that the pathways between the community and the policymakers and the government are designed in such a way that allow for that continual dialogue. And I think that the health department, I also want to just take a moment to thank Dr. Collins for taking the position that she did during the midst of, I don't know, how many people would really take that job in the midst of a pandemic. So I just want to thank her for that. And I do want to say that I think that the employees of the health department as well have done an incredible job of responding to this pandemic. And in their response, they have really opened up pathways, I believe, to allowing for community involvement. And we have to continue to build on those pathways. We need to allow for community organizations to really have I really don't like seats at the table, because I feel like we're now more in a virtual environment, but really just to have a voice in the process. And I think that that's something that this resolution has, sort of set forth, is to try to continue to bring that forward. One of the things that it calls for in the resolution is, to have a more focused health equity panel. And I really think that that needs to be cross-community and even cross-departmental within the county. As a chair of the CPC, we have a couple of different county employees who sit on the CPC, and sometimes we'll notice in the middle of meetings that someone at the health department's working on something that someone at CDW is working on. It's completely separately. They sort of find out at our meetings. And I think that as a community organization, when I saw this and I saw what Supervisor Villegas was trying to do, and specifically the Board of Health had also really kind of come forward with her on that, which is, I think, also one of the things that the county continues to do, and we need to continue to provide focus to, is commissions, and making sure that that is sort of the intermediacy between the government policymakers and the people that are here. And so I see this as a place where we can really try to make sure that we take a moment to reflect on how are we interacting with our community, and are those interactions fully representative of all of the different sectors that represent our community. And actually, it was funny when Deanna said the number 12, I immediately thought, because we're federally funded, we are required to have 12 sectors of the community representatives to get federal funding. So 12 to me means that. And it's funny because I don't think 12 does justice to the number of sectors and representations that are needed in our community. But I think that we can really take this, this resolution, and I know that the health department has already added some of the staff to that, and really look at both the data aspects that exist, like who are we serving? And I think that those are some things that I know Dr. Cullen and the health department have really been focusing on. It's one of the asks in the resolution, or one of the commands in the resolution, is to really get those informatic data points. And I know that that's something that they're trying to build the infrastructure to. And so I think that that's one of the things we need to focus on is who are we serving? How are we serving it? And then also, as we're having these conversations with the community, who's there, who's not there? And we also need to open up those conversations to ensure that they can sometimes be a little confrontational. I find myself as a chair of a commission, sometimes our conversations we're so sensitive to each other that we don't sometimes just say, you know what, that's blatantly wrong. There's a problem with what you just said. And so we don't have those arguments that need to exist for us to be able to grow. And so when people come to the table into the meetings and no one wants to have this confrontational conversation, then the voices who have been underrepresented for so long feel unsafe to even speak out about something that they feel is wrong because no one else is talking about how something is wrong. And so I think that if we can open up those dialogues, and I really see this resolution doing that. And I just want to, again, kind of finish with what I was saying that I really think that the health department employees have done an incredible job, throughout this pandemic. They are working to try to implement this. I know that there's still a pandemic of COVID going on. So this pandemic of racial disparity is I wouldn't say it's taking a back burner, but it's struggling to keep the fires ignited because staff are just divided so much. But I really think across departmental and community community representation on equity issues for Pima County is something that we could do. And I'm looking forward to working with the health department and Pima County on how we can bring the community there and make sure that we have a cross representation.
Absolutely. I mean, community engagement is going to be central to it, and I'm so appreciative. Thank you, Paul. I want to invite Jan and Dr. Cullen into the conversation as well. I mean, you all are really tasked with the implementation of this resolution and creating this plan and strategy to make it a countywide initiative. So I want to just invite you both to the space to talk about, like, how's it going, y'all? And you're both muted.
So it's what happens when you're a little bit later. Thank you. Terry and I chatted a little bit earlier, and I want to give a little history and some background, and then Terry and I are going to talk a little bit about what's happening across the county. And I think the bottom line up front, just to give us an idea of what we're working on, is that a reminder that Pima County has actually done an incredible job and been very affirmatively involved in this space for about a decade. And I tell you that, and also tell you that we have done, frankly, almost nothing to move the needle. We began about 10 years ago, with what was called Communities Putting Prevention to Work. And it was a $15 million grant that allows us to really go out and begin to look at racial inequities that were impacting our health equality in the community. We looked at obesity, we looked at the problems that involve the lack of access to food and to healthy foods, the fact that it's really easy to go out and get unhealthy food, but very difficult to come by community gardens and fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that. We also talked about the fact that exercise is important, and in the great areas of the community, sidewalks, safe streets, ways to exercise don't exist. So we began to look at that over a decade ago, and it led to the creation of really a new health department. Many of you know Dr. Cullen's, the gentleman who came before Dr. Cullen, Dr. Garcia. And when we brought in Dr. Garcia, it was frankly the first time in decades that we'd had a physician director of the health department. And our goal was to make sure that we had someone to whom the community would look as that expert. If something were going on in the community, who is that voice that we rely on and we trust? Dr. Garcia was there, and now we're so thrilled to have Dr. Cullen. But when we look at all the things that are happening, we began to look at, as a county, what's so important, which is the health department now, with the resolution, with Supervisor Ywca and Supervisor Elias before her, is our opportunity to take the health department and become the core of the countywide effort. Because we can fix some of the public health aspects, but if we're not dealing with land use planning and zoning and housing and access to housing, and how are we developing communities and allowing new construction, new development to take place to ensure that we have that we don't have the food deserts anymore, that we have the access we need to public transportation and to roads and to all of the things that make a healthy community and make it the core of the things we're doing, because we've not had it. And as I say, not from lack of trying, but the takeaway I hope to everyone watching today is that we do a good job as government, but anybody here, Dr. Cullen, me, anybody else working for the county, we follow the lead of our board of supervisors. And we have had an extraordinary group of elected officials that provides us that policy direction and establishes our budgets. But the board of supervisors reflects the community in which we live. And if everyone here watching isn't involved and engaged in that dialogue, because that's what we need to impact what the decision makers have to say, so that Terry and I can do the day-to-day procedural work that implements that policy and takes it to the next level. So we do have a lot going on. I do remind you, what's been interesting to us is about the time we began to look at communities putting prevention to work 10 years ago, remember, was the time we passed the Affordable Care Act. And while it has provided potentially greater access to healthcare across the country, I'm not sure it's provided access to quality care in the same level that we've seen throughout the country. And it's also a reminder that the first time we saw a president talk about the need for healthcare was Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. So things do take a little while, but we don't give up on them. And we keep working. And to tell you a little bit more about exactly how we're taking the elements in Betty's and the supervisor's resolution and moving forward with the day-to-day operations. Not only, there's been a lot of focus on the pandemic and on COVID-19 because it's hard not to address that. It really is, it kind of sucks the oxygen out of the room. But when it goes or comes, we're still going to have to deal with all of the issues of inequity in our community. So Terry, maybe a great time for you to start talking about where we are with the health department.
I just wanted to cut in just ever so quickly. But definitely want to get into it, Dr. Cullen. But I also noticed in the chat that there's, the language of the resolution is very specific, and also that people are feeling a little bit under-resourced insofar as what it means in real time, in real language. And so if we can start to address that.
Okay.
I also, Dr. Cullen, when you're finished, I'm going to put up another poll in regards to getting folks involved as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Deanna, I see you furiously writing down notes, so I'll want to as well. But Dr. Cullen, please, if you wouldn't mind, join the conversation.
Great. Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for welcoming me to this amazing panel. I want to go back to something that Paul said. When I took this job, I didn't know I was coming in for a pandemic. And that's actually really important because the discussion I had that made me take this position was related to the future. It was related to coming into a community where there was a verbalized commitment for justice. And Deanna, I want to just focus on that word because I think we focus on equity and it really is about justice. And I was given a verbal commitment from Dr. Garcia, as well as the administrator who interviewed me, that is where we were going. And I came because I believed this was a moment of potential transformation and equity and justice, and to create, as some people have heard me say lately, the healthiest county in America. A fairly audacious goal, one I've been able to verbalize. And I think the fact that we can verbalize that is critical as we look at our county and our county's commitment. I want to talk briefly about the resolution. I don't want to make it all understandable because I understand that concern. I think we may have to do some work on that. But the one thing I want to start with first off is Betty's amazing commitment through the Board of Health and her staff, one of whom I'm privileged enough to have work with us right now, is really why we were able to get through this, as well as the Board of Health, which was an open vessel and vehicle to try to work with it. But when we went to help Betty's staff write this, what we realized is that, Paul, to go to what you said, that we don't really have a lot of the data that we need. We don't have the ability for any member of the community to go to a dashboard and look at what does years of productive life lost look like. And when you look at the data in certain ways, you see significant and very concerning disparities. But if you don't cut the data the right way, you guys, as you know, you can mask anything you want. And we've seen that happen over generations where, oh, it's not a big issue. Oh, it's not a big deal. Well, when you really can have the data in the way you need it, the race data, the ethnic data, the language data, the literacy data, we're then able to start highlighting what we call the hotspots, our social vulnerability index, which right now is what drives what we're doing. And so I want to segue from that, the recognition that this resolution has been critical to what we are imbuing within the health department and hopefully throughout the county this concept of health for all, health in all policies, social in all policies, this recognition that whatever happens, we need to work together. And as Paul says, make sure that the right hand and the left hand and the left leg and the right leg all know what's happening, so that the corpus, the body of what we are doing are all moving together, because collectively we can have such a greater significant impact. I want to just talk briefly about what Betty talked about, and then springboard from that to what we're seeing right now with vaccination, because I think people are interested in that, and I want people to understand what we are trying to do. So Betty was right. Early on, when you looked at who had access, what was there, and Betty beat that drum repeatedly to remind us that we needed to be attentive, we needed to have testing available in the communities that were suffering the greatest burden, not just from mortality, but from morbidity. And we all know now, in retrospect, those predictors: community of color, poor communities, communities where people were not able to work at home, communities that didn't have high broadband access, really to reflecting the urban planning that has gone in and traditionally and still historically has created this disparities there. We addressed that, and it informed what we were able to do with vaccines. And I really am grateful that the health department, the board of supervisors, the administrators in the community have allowed us to approach vaccination with an equity lens. And everything we have done from the beginning has been with that lens, even to call out, these pods are great. These big pods are great, but they are contributing to inequity. And we saw that if you look at any of the dashboards and you look at moving the needle in terms of racial and ethnic data, in terms of who's been able to get immunized. And so what you see today is this commitment of us being in the community, with the community, of the community, and of the organizations there who have invited us, us meaning the health department, but really all of us. They're inviting all of us to participate in their community and to be a part of that community and provide vaccines. And I use that word intentionally. We provide the vaccines, but the whole community is who's ensuring that vaccination happens and that we're able to move that needle. I will say, last night on one of the news channels, we were in an elementary school yesterday. That's a more rural elementary school. And I was heartened by the fact that we were there and people were there, but I was disheartened by the fact that there were portrayals of older people who were disabled getting vaccines. It is April. We should have been able to get these higher risk groups immunized before that. And we are still, so we're still making this just. We're still working to make the edges work, to make sure that we are in the communities, that when someone calls, that we're able to answer and we're reflecting what the need is. The needs are great. I want to echo what Jan said. To move a needle on racism and justice is a generational work. I spent most of my career working with American Indian and Alaska Natives, and I know you've all heard it's a 7 generation. When you make a decision, you look out for what it is going to be in 7 generations. Now, I don't believe that we need 7 generations to accelerate and start moving this needle. But I do think the historical injustice, historical racism, the institutional and structural remnants and really constraints that exist from that will require all of us to be fairly radical and a little revolutionary in the way we approach what we want to do to get there. I want to close by saying, no, that it has been such a privilege to be a part of Pima County, a part of the health department, a part of working with Jan and others, Betty, who have
continue to inspire me on a regular day. And sometimes Jan comes through, and last week this happened. She looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're scowling." And I was scowling. And then I went, "But I'm not scowling at you. I'm scowling at how much work there is to do and how
But I
all
brought you
work
chocolate.
together." Right. And she brought me chocolate. She always brings me food. So with that, I will close this kind of reflection on the health department.
Thank you so much for that. And I think also that last bit of exchange between you and Jan is what's also important, that we have to show up for each other as the humans doing this work. And so, yes, we have much work to do. We have much to identify. We have much to uncover and to face together. Deanna, I wanted to just, I'm real curious, lady, what you're scratching down over there and making notes of. So please, if I wanted to invite you all to unmute yourselves and let's have we have a few minutes left, and I just want you to reflect on what we've been reading in the chat, in the Q&A, and what you've heard from our colleagues around this table. Please, yeah, go ahead, Deanna.
So, Dr. Colin, I really appreciate hearing the invited into, right? It's imperative. And in academia, a term that we use is community-based participation, right? That's it, CBPR, right? You always want to involve the community. And here's the thing is, I think so often we take for granted that, oh, we want to help you, and that we show up and that people are like, oh, you're here, woo, woo, woo. There's some, and you also spoke to this, Dr. Colin, about, the historical context of what decades, right? Decades. And so one of the things that I think is incredibly important when we look at racial injustice and how do we begin is doing the work is it's imperative to look at a lens of trauma-informed approach. If we're not doing that, we're going to be way off mark, right? And so those of you who have never heard of the term trauma-informed approach, it's making the assumption that every person or community you go into has suffered some form of trauma. And you're like, well, what's that? Is it PTSD? You served our country in the military and you come back from Iran or Afghanistan, or you have your own personal trauma. There's something called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So those of you in the audience that come from a divorced family, you have one ACE, right? My parents divorced when I'm 5. I have one ACE. And if you have one ACE, there's about a 50% chance that you'll have 2 ACEs. And what does that mean? The more ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and these are things that had happened before you're 18, it has long-term implications. And so when we look at communities of color, LGBTQ, gender expansive communities that have historical trauma that's happening, right now, wait a minute, right now, right? How many people died yesterday, right? From all these injustices. And maybe some of you are like, whoa, that's kind of intense. Oh, absolutely, it's intense, right? If we're not talking about things like power and privilege, the fact that I can sit here and have an hour and a half conversation to talk about these things, the fact that someone in the chat's like, I make $150,000 a year and I'm not really sure what this is all about. Well, that's a whole lot of privilege, right? So we have to actually step back and actually do some internal work on ourselves about our own identities and our own experiences to begin to understand, right? And I get impassioned, right? You're like, why is she so whatever? It's like, decades of structural oppression, right? So when you do that to groups of people over time, they get frustrated. They're tired, right? They're tired. And if you go in, you're like, hey, I got these vaccines for you and I'm so happy and everything like that. You have to take in consideration what has happened to them to get to that point where they're maybe not so thrilled to see you, right?
Yeah, that's really important. And thank you for bringing that to the forefront as well, Deanna. In the chat, we also have old, friend Tim Wernette also talking about the stress, the impacts of that stress on the bodies doing the work. And so I think that's a really important lens to bring to the table as well. We've had a couple of side conversations happening in the chat and in the Q&A. And I just want to say that this is an introductory conversation, and this is one that I hope that we can all stay engaged together with, and our audience members, because it's going to take all of us to undo the burden of this history, which goes back to the founding of our nation. If we want to be real and honest, right? And so, the cultures and the institutions that we built upon that pain is important to recognize, and we do our work. We do our work together. I just wanted to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I wanted to give you all just some more opportunities to, we have 8 more minutes until 1 o'clock, and I know that we said that we would give ourselves until 1:30, but I want to make sure that those folks who are here for their lunch hour have time to ask their questions, and we can, answer to the best of our ability. We have some folks, Kathleen Dreyer has made her commitment to want to work on these issues with us all, and so I think that's fantastic. I'm going to put up another poll just asking our audience and our panelists, are you interested in learning more about how the community can provide input and professional expertise in order to address these racial and ethnic health inequities and income inequality? And so I'll let that continue to come in.
Leanne, while you're doing that, I first want to just thank Deanna for bringing up ACEs and historical trauma. There was actually a question to the panelists, which Dr. Cullen, I don't know if you also want to witness more about health department personnel involvement in actually specifically bringing up historical trauma policy development with regards to law enforcement. I just wanted to state that I really think it is important, and I'm grateful to TPD. They hosted a mandatory training. The CPC was involved in providing ACEs and historical trauma training. We are trying to encourage the sheriff's department to do that. So a call to action, in my opinion, is really as individuals who care about tackling this issue and eradicating it, as Deanna pointed out, it's about continuing to be involved. And most importantly, there are these county commissions that exist, and one is the Board of Health. I serve as the chair of the Metropolitan Education Commission, but they are public hearings, and I strongly desire and invite each and every one of you to go to those meetings where you can. Many of them have calls to the public, and you can bring out these issues. You can also find out issues that are being taken on or issues that aren't. There are plenty of issues that as commissioners we just haven't brought to the forefront of the priority list, and so I think we as commissioners need to do a better job of inviting, as Deanna called us to do, is really making sure that it's not just that we are public and therefore we're accessible, but really inviting you to come to those things. But I also would call each and every one of you to be involved in those areas, because I think that that's really the avenue for government to be informed, because, Jan works 50, 60 hours a week, but she can't take phone calls every day from every person, which I know she does do a very good job of taking calls from the public. But I think that it would be easier for her to hear from these commissions in a more focused point. And so I would just say, for one call to action is go to your Board of Health meetings, go to your regular commissioner meetings, and I will take on the call to action as well from my end to make sure that you do feel invited to those things. And I'll be working with the clerk of the board to figure out how we can make that more inviting to people. So that would be my call to action, but also to others.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Paul. That's important. Betty, I see you. Did you have something to say?
If I could jump in, I just want to say that I know that Deanna talked about accountability, and I think it's really important that we really take accountability for this declaration, and that the county really look at that as well. And I want to say, we depend a lot on the health department, but as Jan said, you also have all the other departments that run the county, and they need to know, and they need to be trained on how to look at things with that same public health lens, without the health department having to do it for them. If they were given the tools to do that, then change could happen across the county in all policies. but accountability for this resolution, I think, is really important. And looking at every sector that deals with these disparities and inequities, and maybe having individual talks, conversations about the public health crisis in housing, in transportation, in planning and zoning, and community development, in workforce development. Those are all areas that that make up our community. And so it's important that we take each one individually and have conversations about each sector individually. So that's how I would like to end this. That we don't just, again, keep it on a shelf, and when we have time we'll get to it. I think this is an important issue. We have this window of knowing what the pandemic did to bring out all these disparities, and so let's work on taking advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Leanne, I want to follow up on what Betty said, because I think there is a unique opportunity here because of all the events in the last year that are independent of the pandemic, as well as the pandemic itself. And the health department about 3 to 4 months ago realized there would be recovery. There will be recovery, and we need to be resilient, just similar to what trauma-informed care requires for individuals and for communities, that we need to create because of, this isn't an ACEs thing, though we use ACEs a lot, but the trauma that has happened because of COVID. And what I say is, depending upon your community, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that died. If you're in a community that's been highly impacted, like an American Indian Alaska Native community, almost everybody knows somebody. It's not 7 degrees of separation, it's 1 degree of separation, and the trauma and the impact is much greater. And so, Betty, I think, to follow up on what you said, I believe, and I think most people I work with believe, that we have this moment in time right now that may be a generational moment for us to seize. Do I know exactly what we need to be doing? No, but I actually have challenged internally our health department that we be audacious and we think of where do we want to go, and then let's figure out that path. And I think the resolution gives us foundational work. Paul, what you talked about, this foundational work of working with cross-sector. Deanna, what you talked about, the foundational work of ensuring that all these lessons we've learned, and Jan, as one of my leaders, I think that and what we're seeing in the chat is, what do I do next? I think a lot of that is, from the health department perspective, we're in the process of trying to figure out what is that path? What are the baby steps we need to take? What's to get to this larger thing? But I just would challenge all of us, and I think it's one reason why, Leanne, this is so wonderful, that we do, the discussion is different now. The vernacular is different. While people may not understand or have grasped the effects of racism, we can have this discussion in a way that I think is empowering. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to share that when I shared the poll results, that we had 116 folks respond that yes, they want to learn more. Yes, they want to know how to get involved and do the work. And so I am so heartened with that, Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Deanna, please.
One of the things that I haven't heard yet, and I think it's incredibly important, and it's resilience, right? Because when we think of limited resources, and we've got to figure out how to, be the most efficacious in the utilization of them, it's the resilience piece is actually counters ACEs, right? And how do we build resilience? Every time someone has a positive experience, we build resilience, right? And here's the thing, it's also layered. It's the resilience within the individual. So when the individual has some, and I'll call it respite, right, is builds resilience through whatever mechanisms, right? It gives them more bandwidth, right? And then when you have folks that are in communities that are most effective, and all those individuals build some resilience, it gives resilience for the community. Now the community has more bandwidth, right? And then how do those communities intersect with all other things, right? When I look and do research and, just looking at some of the things that the health department is doing before today's presentation, everything is just stratified, like here's race and here's gender and and it's like intersections, my friends. There are so much intersectionality, right? If you're not familiar with the word, I'll put a link in there for you to watch a TED Talk with Kimberly Crenshaw on intersectionality. Really important concept, right? Because we might be going into one community and represents, the polka dots, but the polka dots are also like with the stripes, and then we have, the plaids, and with those intersections, right? There comes a building of resiliency, right? The movement of folks in different communities. And so I think spending more time on what does that look like in each community? Because if we can facilitate that, right, that's the piece that increases capacity within an individual, which increases capacity within the community, and which increases capacity within a society to actually address something as monumental as structural racism.
Leanne, if I may, I think one of a wonderful byproduct, I guess, of the pandemic has been all aspects of the county have been involved in some way with the health department. And so as we look through what that future is going to be, as we talk about what's the resiliency, how do we come together? I don't see a time when we break that apart, where we begin to absolutely have those connectivities, and the connections between the health department and the other departments. Because if we don't have the support of things as basic as central services, but I can't emphasize enough, as we've talked about, it's zoning, it's land use, it's lots of other things coming together. And I try to remind people again, it's not been a great year, and it's been tough on a lot of people. When we came out of the influenza in 1918, remember, it led into the Roaring 20s. So whenever we have a country have had some really tough, dark times, some really amazing new rebirth of excitement and new feelings and new generation have come from that. And I think that's where we got to go, and I'm excited that we have people like Dr. Cullen and a health department so integrated in the fiber of what we do. And that's how we need to, it's not us taking it to the community, because that suggests that there's a bifurcation, if you will, between the community and those of us as government, but simply to continue to recognize that we're the representatives of, we hope, the government, providing the tools to make sure that each individual has access to that same information and gets us that next step. I was making notes, Deanna, thank you, because we've been kicking off our DEI committees within the county, but we need to make it IDEA, so we need to have the 7,000 people represented in Pima County out being part of this effort as well.
Yeah, and I think, I'm reading in the chat that, and to those who must step away, please go, and thank you so much for spending your time with us. But I want to just speak to the level of patience, the level of community building, the level of relationships and trust that we have to build in order to do this work and have it be transformative, not transactional. And so I noticed that folks are, very hungry to get involved and stay, and I hope they can stay involved, because we're looking for long-term solutions. It's not going to happen next week, but I believe that with all of us working together, we can approach something approximating justice, right? And keeping that as our idea. I just wanted to dip in one more time with you all, and any other further reflections, Betty, now that you have, really, relinquished your seat, and I saw that Ywca Grijalva is also in our session today and commented in the chat. Just where are your thoughts now as you return to the world of affordable housing, with how we navigate these spaces in the city of South Tucson and beyond?
Yeah, so being here, executive director of the South Tucson Housing Authority has really made me see things from a different lens because I never really worked in public housing before. And so this is a whole different different type of housing that I'm working in. And it's really given me the opportunity, and I think about I have all these ideas, of course, and about making this community better, making bringing resources to these children to break the generational poverty cycle that exists here. And how do we do that? And bringing partners together, to be part of it. I was talking to someone about maybe even having the South to South Public Housing Authority. We have 172 units of affordable housing here, where we can do some type of a pilot program. I've reached out to the health department, and they're wonderful. We've got some really great things that may come up in the near future. I'm working with some U of A grads, public health grads that are awesome and wonderful, and help me do this amazing survey for my residents here. And so I'm excited about the work that can happen here in this 1.2 square mile city. And the one of the big issues that we didn't discuss in detail today is public safety and law enforcement and the judicial system, which are all, those are on top of everyone's mind right now for so many reasons. And I think that that's something that we need to definitely keep in mind, that the crisis in the public health, definitely there's a connection with all of it. We know that. So that should definitely be another topic, another conversation for a later time.
Yeah, we're here for it, for sure. Thank you.
And if I could add to that, just looking at the resolution again too, and acknowledging some of the things I think we really need to make sure. And Jan talked about the health department being the core of the county moving forward. And right now, I think they make about 4% of the total employees. And so it's going to take time to build that. But I also think integrating that, as the thing states, making sure that it's a part of our budgeting processes for the county, that it's a part of our policies. And maybe, it's really about having liaisons and representatives, that the health department has individuals that are sort of relationship managers for the rest of the community, and doing health impact assessments on all policies and changes in budgeting. And I really see, just as I look at really a couple of these points, I think that they're so well done. And I think that that's a huge credit to you, Betty, to the health department, to the Board of Health in doing this. But, I see that those are the steps that we need to take, is really integrating that and figuring out how we make sure that the health department has those resources. And so, Dr. Collin, I know that there's been some struggles with getting that data, but if there are ways that we can in the community help in making sure that we are collecting the data and analyzing it, there's 116 or so that we're interested in being involved, but I can speak also as a chair of the Community Prevention Coalition, that if we can help in any way trying to get you that data or the resources to get that data, we're here. We want this data just as well, because it also helps us when we're looking for grants, to know what's going on in our community. And so I just see it, as some of the next steps is really just to go back and sort of ensure that these are being integrated in everything that we do. And so I just want to thank you for Betty and the health department for putting this together. But I think that these next steps are really laid out here. We just need to make sure that we can do them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super helpful. We have a couple of questions, and I want to get to them, and then we'll tie up, and we'll finish up the presentation a little bit early. Julie Kudna, excuse me, I'm sorry, I apologize if I messed up your name, Julie. What are the concrete steps that the county will be taking to act on the resolution? If anybody wants to answer that.
Well, Terry and I can maybe share with, I think some of the very first steps are things that Terry's been doing every day in the health department. And I think we've really seen the specifics of the resolution play out in the way that we've been dealing with the pandemic by as Terry's been talking about, we can't sit back and wait for people to come to get vaccinated from the different communities. And she talks about being out in a school, and I think she was in Picture Rocks last night, and we've been going to every part of the community, sending people door to door and making sure that not only are we in the community, but that the people in the community going door to door look like their neighbors, so that it's safe and it's welcoming, and that we reflect communities in which we're serving at any different point in time. We also are just working very hard, and it's Terry's team doing it with our communications team, to ensure that all of our messaging to the community is in languages and with the appropriate cultural tones, and so that it can be received by the people to whom we're trying to communicate. We're trying to move past the days where I think there was a time when everything was in English, and then we simply started taking everything and translating it to Spanish, which sometimes works, but is not necessarily recognizing the need to also be bicultural and to move in parts of the community. So if you look through Betty's resolution and the board's resolution and sort of tick through each of them in the microcosm, Terry's department is moving that forward. And globally, what you'll see is it start to weigh out as we develop next year's budget. We will be going to the board with the budget at the end of this month. And that's where, the chickens really come home to roost, because if we have the dollars, that's the commitment of our board, and it gives us the path that we need as staff to move it forward. You will see an expansion in dollars going into the health department. You'll see an expansion in some of the areas of the county that can address the specifics of this resolution. So, Terry, do you want to talk a little bit more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I do. I want to remind people that so there were good and bad things about the resolution. The bad part is it came right in the middle of the pandemic, but the good part is it gave us an opportunity to use this resolution as a foundational way to inform what we were doing as we go forward. But if you look at the resolution, it's well crafted. There are very specific things that are expected from it. And what I'd like to do is just respond to some of them. We have not done all of these. We have not even uncovered some of the, well, we've uncovered them. We know what we need to do, but we have not been able to do it. And a lot of that is resourcing, and it's not just fiscal resourcing, it's also human resourcing, humans informed by the trauma of a year that has been quite difficult for many people working in the health department, but not just the health department, with the community and the CBOs that we've been working with. But we are in the process of expanding the health equity program at the department, and this is thanks to the board. The board gave us a plus up in our budget for the current year we're in. We have 3 positions that we will be hiring specifically to look at and help lead the health department health equity program. Those positions have been approved. They are going to advertise pretty quickly. I'm not really sure when, but they will advertise in the next few weeks themselves. Our REACH grant, which many of you are probably familiar with, our racial and ethnic approaches to the community health program, has been a critical part of all the work that we have been able to do. We have a secondary grant, mitigating COVID in communities of color, our MC3 grant that was from the state. Our REACH grant is considered the best performing REACH grant in the country by the CDC, who is the funder for that. And we continue to leverage the opportunity that the REACH grant has given to us. And for those of you who are watching, I have the opportunity of having printed out the resolution, so I know what's in it. I think we tried to get it up there for you. I want to go to what Paul said about the data. Paul, the data that we have lacks in certain areas, and we have been floating around the internal concept of, since we've done a vaccine dashboard, a COVID dashboard, a case dashboard, we actually believe we need to do an overall data dashboard that can meet the needs of the community and can do what you said, that CBOs can get the data that is available and make it available to them. So we're not there yet. We are standing up a small data team to really help us go through that. And once again, that's with the support of the county and the board to be able to do that. The equity and the response, I feel like of all the things we've done, that's the one we've really been paying attention to. Are we perfect? No. Are there still things we need to do? Yes. And this health equity and all, Health in All policy is really a policy initiative that we, because of Betty's guidance, have floated. We have not integrated that yet. That really is a health department responsibility to push that out. It's not the health department's responsibility to make sure that happens cross county, but we do have a role there, and we have not, we have paid attention to that, but not been able to pay the amount of justice to that it needs. And then a lot of this rest of this is policy and economic development. The one thing I want to make people aware is that we do know, you know how I talked about this as a once in a generation thing. There are funding opportunities coming to the health department, specifically through health equity. They're not couched as eliminating racism, but obviously health equity helps eliminate racism. And we just applied for one grant last week. We have another one that we're submitting May 3rd. We have another one related to community health workers that we're submitting May 12th. We're getting some notices of some additional funding that will be coming in specific for health equity. So I think what you will see is an accelerated response at the health department under, I just want to be clear, the vernacular will be health equity, but embedded in that is this commitment to help eliminate racism and what this conference is about, and increasing empowerment.
If I can just add one thing quickly, because I think we've been talking about data, and it's another area in which I would ask for the community to understand and to help us work with the electeds. In that, we began a few years ago, we have couple of departments that have been created in just the last few years to focus on data. Terry's World is now doing more to focus on data, and that can be a little scary, quite frankly, because when you work with and work for elected officials, sometimes when you start watching data, as we've said, the things we care about and we're watching move very slowly. So if you're looking for the needle to move, we don't necessarily have results in 2 and 4 year bites, which is sometimes what some of the community wants to see, or decides that success is measured in that way. So I encourage the community to understand and be patient with our board and our elected officials, as well as the staff. We can't move any needle unless we start, though, counting that data. We need baselines, and then we need to see how we're moving it forward. So as I say, the frightening part can be we could establish a baseline and we can start moving needles and not do real well and not look very well. But what it means is we're willing to take that chance, because if we don't have those baselines in the data, we'll never make change in the community. But we need our public to have some patience with our electeds to help us continue down the path.
One of the things I'd like to add, and it was brought up earlier, is like who's here and who's not here. And I haven't heard it spoken of, our community health centers. Right? Our community health centers do an amazing job, El Rio being one of them. We have Marana, we have Desert Sanita, and then we have to the south in Santa Cruz County, Mariposa. So these community health centers have been working with the populations of interest for a long time. And we know that there's always, unfortunately, a competition for resources, right? Dr. Cullen, I'm going to apply for some grants. I can assure you, Nancy Johnson's, I'm applying for some grants, right? We know that. And that's problematic. It's problematic because you get a grant, and this is anyone, this isn't directed to the Pima County Health Department. It's just, I see that you get a grant, you start this program, you don't get the grant again, oh, the program goes away, right? And I think there needs to be a more mindfulness of, oh, who is already doing this and how can we help leverage and invite them in so they can help us do the job. They're already doing it. So why not put more intention to supporting El Rio? And it's hard, right? It's so hard. It's like, okay, I want to give up some resources. Oh, I so wish people would understand when we elevate the folks who experience the most health disparities, when we elevate, everybody else is elevated, right? This is a return on the investment, folks, that like is priceless. It is priceless. So when we start looking at like your leadership, right? Like that, there should be an expectation from the participants that like, yeah, why is Nancy not here? I don't know. Maybe she wasn't invited. Maybe she's not, I don't know, right? I really don't know. And that's not the important piece, right? The important piece is if there's funding and someone else is doing it and maybe doing it more effectively, can't we figure something out to like, oh, let's help support their infrastructure, right? Because if we can start utilizing the infrastructure from one another, right, we become more efficient. And what it does is it's so much energy on getting more resources in. And I'm telling you, right, and I mean this in the most respectful way, Dr. Colin, and all of you that are participating, right, is we can be a little bit more mindful about these things, right, and we can free up other resources that we already have, right? We can free up the internal resources when we support the infrastructure of someone else that's actually doing the same work. Because when we look at, keep the eye on the carrot over there, it's like, what do I want, right? As a public health practitioner, what do I want? I want every member of my community to thrive, period. And I know that everyone here wants the same thing. You want every member of your community, of your family to thrive, right? So it's not like we have competing interests, right? The competing interests come from all different kinds of things, and I'll stop there.
Deanna, I just want to respond. A rising tide raises all boats. It's one of my mottos. I worked with American Indian Alaska Native people for 27 years. I so know the competition for resources. I want to be clear, the grants I'm talking about have been decided by the grantor to be specific to local health departments. So, and obviously everything we do with being very mindful of CBOs and what is happening in the community. And you know, there is an issue with grants, right? Because you're beholden to the grantor, and you are responding to their metrics and their goals. And so we enter into those with a lot of reflection and a sense of how we can do appropriate engagement. And I really appreciate your input. I want to reassure you that from my perspective, at least, our goal is to raise all boats, not just to raise the public health department. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, Betty, go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing that, you know, you guys keep calling it Betty's resolution. It really wasn't. I mean, I may have instigated this process, but this is really Pima County's resolution. And I just want to say we should be really proud as a county, because we're one of 50 counties nationwide that has declared racism a public health crisis. We're the only one in the state of Arizona. So, you know, there are opportunities for grants for CBOs just because you're part of Pima County. And I encourage all of them to go after those grants and really let's make this work. You know, let's make this work for everybody, because this is our time and our resolution. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just, you know, as we proceed forward, I know that Gare.
Now is the time
oops,
to
excuse
get
me.
the new
Sorry.
wave OxyPure air purifier.
Oh my goodness.
One of the world's most
Sorry about that. You know, part of I was trying to pull up anyway. The CDC has also declared racism as a public health issue and crisis, and so there is a building momentum. And so the entire point of this conversation, and hopefully it instigates additional conversations, is that we need to move from declarations to actual change. And so I am so appreciative to all of you, and together we will create a matrix that can make this happen. I believe in that. I'm so thankful to Pima County as the only municipality in the state of Arizona to do so, to have this declaration. It matters. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much. I hope that we can continue the conversation. I hope that we can get into conversation with leaders at our indigenous and you know, the O'odham Nation and the Yaqui Nation as well, as we continue this conversation. And I just wanted to say thank you. It means a lot to ask for this amount of time of your schedules. And I just am so appreciative of you all. And to all of our audience members, thank you so much. And this is just the beginning, y'all. There's many conversations to be had. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Be well. Thank you. So long, y'all.